So thank you. I'm David McGookin from Feratum, but this work was done when I was at Aalto University in Finland. So you don't need me to tell you, but I'm going to anyway, that smartphones have changed the nature of how we do photography. Rather than just taking images, or perhaps when you go on holiday to a nice place, or when you really need to, you know you're going to want to take pictures, smartphones have been able to allow us to take pictures almost anywhere. And that means that we've increased the number of photos that we take of sort of everyday and mundane things, like in the supermarket. That's led to an explosion of the number of pictures that we actually have. And if you look through your smartphone, I'm sure you're going to find you've got a lot of them. And that's led to manufacturers like Apple and Google, they are the only manufacturers these days, building software technologies and toolkits to cloud back your photo library. So no more do you take pictures on an SD card and you transfer them. You take the picture and it automatically appears in the cloud, and you just end up with this larger and larger kind of digital repository of images. And the question is, of course, what do we actually do with those images? Well, obviously one of the main things is that we share them on social media, maybe on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. But when we share things on social media, we tend to try to present an aspect of ourselves which is positive towards the audience that we're presenting. We're kind of tailoring the content to the view that we wish to project about ourselves. And this, in many cases, with Instagram, can be taken really quite far, with people going to specific places or getting professional photographers to take their images so that they look good on Instagram. But it does mean that in everyday life, there are images that we probably don't share on Instagram. And therefore we end up with these large amounts of images, increasingly, which we probably don't ever look at all. Maybe you've got images on your phone you've never looked at since you've taken them. So the question is then, what can we do with that? And one core value of older images that we've taken is our ability to reminisce over them. So to help stimulate and help consider forgotten memories that maybe have fallen into the back of our mind. Now, HCI has, over the years, completed a significant amount of work into reminiscing. It's found that reminiscing is valuable at all ages, and it's something that people wish they did more often. It's also found that people need to be prompted to reminisce. You tend not to just do it. You need actually some kind of external prompt. And in giving external prompts which link now to then in some way, or to the media that you're going to reminisce over, are actually stronger. So the idea being showing you what you were doing a year ago today or 2 years ago today are examples of that. And much of this work has been already embodied into mainstream applications. So Facebook has On This Day, which will pop up previous posts that you made in previous years. Apple, in Apple's usual, not really sure what we're doing way, create these sort of thematic photo galleries, which might show stuff that was been going on a while ago, but they tend not to link it specifically to dates. And then also things like time hop as well. In all of this work, particularly with HCI, we've only really looked at temporal links between now and the media, so a year ago today. But we've also know from diary studies by Van Gennep that what prompts people to reminisce is often location. Location is a very important feature of reminiscing. But for images, Selin and Whittaker found that a large number of people couldn't remember where they'd taken an image just by looking at the image. So location is important, but we don't really remember location very well. So in addition, because we've got these sort of everyday photographs, they happen in sort of everyday environments, and therefore multiple events might overlap. Maybe you go to the same bar every 3 months, but you go to some other people, or maybe you're in a city centre many times in a month with different things going on. So we wanted to kind of investigate this role of location for reminiscing over personal photo images. And also because we've now got things like Google Photos and Apple Photos that have these cloud-backed repositories, we can do it over the entire photo library that you've created, rather than just those images that you've uploaded onto social media, which a lot of existing academic research, largely because of when it was done, uses. So we don't have that kind of that presentation view that you were trying to give. So in this part, I want to look at sort of 3 research questions. So firstly, what is the impact of a location-based relationship to support reminiscing of personal digital photo collections? What's the value of supporting reminiscing beyond only those images that have previously been uploaded onto social media? So looking at the entire photo library that was created. And then also, how do users fit this kind of location-based reminiscing into their day-to-day lives? Where does it work well, where does it not, and what kind of issues are there? So to do that, I created a technological tool called Reveal. Reveal is an iPhone application because it's actually really hard to do this on Android at the moment. And it uses a kind of standard location-based system research approach. So as the user walks around in the environment, the phone periodically searches over their photo collection for images taken in the nearby distance. In this case, we're using about 150 meter radius around the user's current location. And I should say we're only using geotagged photos in this. We're not doing anything particularly sophisticated over the images. If it finds images that the user hasn't seen before, it sets one of these to be the primary image, and it will then fire a notification to the user to tell them that image has been found nearby and prompts them to then open and look at them. The user can ignore this and walk away, in which case the notification is cleared after a few meters, or they can launch the notification and go into Reveal to see what they found. When they do, this is sort of what they get. Out of all the images in the area, assuming there's more than one, we set one of the images being what we call the primary image, and that's displayed immediately full screen. If there are more images, they get this small button in the bottom right, where they can then go to a grid view of all the other images in that area sorted by year. And they can also access a large scrollable version of the image, or they can flip around and see any more metadata that might be existing on that image. So we carried out a study with Reveal over 14 days with 14 participants. So the criteria for participants is they had to have an iPhone, they had to use iCloud Photos, and they had to have geotagging of their images switched on. If they didn't have geotagging of their images switched on, obviously there wouldn't be any data for us to actually look at. And also because we think many of these everyday photographs are taken in everyday kind of situations, we also asked that all participants had to have lived in their current area for about 2 years. And we've basically put this on the city level, so if they lived in the same city for the last 2 years. They used the application as they wanted over 14 days. And this is similar to other reminiscing work, but in our case we actually have a lot more time between the creation of the media and when the viewing took place. And we also did some meta-analysis. There are photo libraries, so the short of it is that Reveal was largely accessing images that were taken over the previous 2 years, given the number of images that participants had in their photo library, the number that were geotagged. A little bit, I'm not going to go into the sort of quantitative stuff very much, but this is just a little bit on what actually happened. Over the 2 weeks, there was a median number of 69 notifications presented. That's about 5 per day, although there were slightly more at the beginning than there were towards the end. A mean and median of 8 were responded to over the study. So again, the number of notifications we're presenting are quite a bit larger than the number of people are actually responding to. And we also had a higher density here towards the start of the study. But when people did interact with Reveal, they did so in a more deep way. The more images where people could access the other images that were seen were accessed about the same number of times as notifications. So when people did respond, they wanted to look at all the photos in that area. So I want to go through the results now, just in a kind of relatively sort of chocolate box approach. You just sort of be a bit picky with them because there's quite a bit in here. But the first is around the sort of practical implications of location. This is location driven, not time driven. So people had to be in the area where they got the notification and respond to it there to get information from Reveal. And what we found is that obviously people only responded when they had time. If they were going somewhere, or they were meeting somebody, or they were in transit, they tended not to respond to the notifications. And those notifications were auto-cleared and they didn't see them. But what we did also find from the notifications that we got is that people began to develop a kind of photographic landscape of their image taking. They became aware quite early on where they had taken images. So the images they had taken at work and at home were 2 very obvious cases that we found. And this acted as a driver to respond to or not. So if people expected to find images in an area and got a notification for them, they tended not to respond. On the other hand, if they were in an area where notifications were not expected or they hadn't thought they'd been, they were actually much more motivated to respond when that happened. So where people got these notifications was actually a kind of important factor of whether they responded to them or not. When we look then at the value of these images and the value of them looking in the location roughly where they were taken, there were a number of things that we found. Obviously, these provided a new perspective to relive old memories. So this was an example that we had from a participant who had previously been in a different job and he happened to find himself on the same bus he used to travel on. And he found that the photographs that he saw on the bus when he got the notification actually helped take him back there and reflect. Also interestingly, and probably expected with this kind of application, is the way in which the environment changes over time. So we obviously had this in cases where the physical environment had changed. Maybe a building had been built or knocked down, and people could see the difference between now and when the photograph was taken. But it happened in much more smaller cases as well. So the first example there is someone who had moved into their home and they'd been taking pictures over the last couple of years of sort of getting their home or getting their house turned into their home. And they could really begin to see the progress they've made over time. The ability to use reveal meant that all the images were kind of cut down to the small subset just for that area, and they could see the progression over time as how the environment that they created had changed. Also, because we did this in Finland, there was fairly significant seasonal variations, and we also saw the same kind of thing where we got notifications showing them images in different seasons. And people could begin to see how the environment had changed over. And in a sense, this also reflected back on their thoughts of how they took photographs. So this participant here found that they'd taken lots of really nice images in the summer, but they hadn't really been there so much in the winter, and maybe they should consider visiting a little bit more. As I said, the previous thing that's happened a lot is a lot of this work's been done on social media and existing uploaded images, but we wanted to put into our photo library. And what we found is that these everyday images are actually valuable to participants. Images which are bad, and I can mean bad in quotes there because it can mean a lot of different things, but sort of photographically not very interesting by themselves, by putting them back into their location, they're often cited as helping to provide reminiscing. So this is an example of a person who'd taken an image which was just for notes. It was just a note. They'd just taken this as reference for the future. But it actually generated this whole idea of a project that they'd done when they were a freshman at university. Another thing that was valuable there was in how images might provoke more everyday event reminiscing. So the ability to think of these very much smaller events that existed. A final thing that we found to be really interesting was the way in which this wasn't just reflections or reminiscing about their lives, but also reflections on their photo-taking practice. So people, as I said before, because they had this photo map, began to become aware of where they'd been taking images and patterns in their life and how they took images. So people began to become aware that they'd always taken this route because there were a larger number of images on it and a larger number of notifications versus other things. And also people began to reflect on the kind of photos they'd taken. Maybe they were taking images of just places and not enough of people, or they weren't taking images that they felt that might be in 20 years were going to help reflect their life as it was now. And then we also saw some examples where people wanted to move beyond just reminiscing and actually act on things. So I mentioned at the beginning we have these large repositories of images, and we probably don't ever go into actually manage them or delete them or get rid of things we don't want. But because we were doing this in a location-based sense, we could cut down the number of images people saw, and they actually wanted to progress into managing those images, deleting them, or so forth. So in conclusion, and very quickly, working over the user's whole photo library does provide benefits. We're getting reminiscing from images that people wouldn't have posted on social media. Obviously, images that posted on social media also cropped up in our study. The location-based part obviously promoted contextual consideration. But also location acts as a filter to support viewing of related images. So images, as I said before, which were related to a place could be sort of pulled together and seen as a single unit. Location, though, also brings challenges. People quickly learn where notifications were and start to stop responding to them. So this is not sort of the only solution of how we do this. And also, as I said before, a lot of research has been done on temporal approaches, so a year ago from now versus location. So one of the things that we really want to look at in the future is how we might combine those approaches and look at temporal and location approaches where needed. So with that, I will stop and ask any questions you've got.
Hey, Dan Cosley, Cornell University. So I have lots of thoughts about this project to talk about offline. I want to say that I think you made an offhand comment about the time change over time being kind of expected. Actually, I think that's really interesting to think about pushing on how people evolve over time, right? And as collections get bigger, it's going to be more useful. The other thing I want to say is you've posed it almost as context versus time, and then you said both, but really there's other kinds of context too that you might consider, right? Like associative memory would say, that the more context I have, the more likely it is that it's going to be kind of useful and retrievable memory. And so things like extracting people from places or objects or all the other kinds of games that you might play that you would context way might actually really push us forward.
Yeah.
I guess that's a comment on a question.
Well,
sorry.
yeah, and I'll just use it to provide word at all. Yes. One of the issues, obviously, with this is that we're looking at this in a location-based environment, and we said people had to be living there for 2 years. Well, people have been living in other places previous to those 2 years, and then they never see those images. Or they do go on holiday to a nice place, and they don't see those images with this approach. So I don't think I parse it as a temporal location thing. I think we need to kind of explore those different approaches more and find out which ones are good in different situations. But we're looking at it also more in a kind of semantic location in the future. So semantically, I'm in a bar. Maybe I should see other images of being in a bar. But that's hard to process someone's entire photo collection like that much together.
Hi, I'm Pamela Gibbs from the University of Baltimore. I apologize, I came in a little late, so if you've already answered this, I do apologize. Do you think culture or diverse demographics impacts the way they view this project that you're working on? Like the way they view the picture, like pictures or react to the notifications or react to,
I think the point being is that they're your pictures, so everybody's going to react differently. So in the project, it's over your own photo library, not over a generic set of sort of images. I didn't mention it, but we definitely saw with people that they changed their perception over time in images. So images which maybe weren't very interesting, obviously images can become better if you have pictures of somebody and that person sadly dies or whatever, that image becomes better. But we also saw it the other way, with images they thought were very important at the time kind of became less important over time, in a way. It's a really interesting talk. I don't think we had a massively diverse demographic to kind of answer that. We were focused more on their technical ability to fit the photos that we had, but that's a really interesting thing to